Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about design. I've always been interested in design. In the early days in Spotify, I noticed how incredibly useful it was. There's a delay in this talking. This is really weird. This is really weird, but what the heck? Maybe we get used to it. Anyway, I saw how valuable it was to have designers, people focusing on the design of their product at a company. So I saw also at Lego company where designers, it's a thing, it's a profession, it's a craft. And at Mojang, I had the chance to actually work as a designer, build features, code features. So I'm going to show some stories and things I've learned from that, and maybe some insights. Every presentation has to have a slide with some famous dude. So here it is. It's done. You can check it off the list. This is just like the word design is so weird, right? Different people have different interpretations of what it means. This is the way I think of it. It's like the deciding how the product is going to work, actually. What does it do? How does it do it? Okay, so a bit of context. I'm going to talk about this game, Minecraft. But the talk isn't really about Minecraft. It's more about, and I'm using that as a source of examples, right? But just for context, it's this game. It's super popular, created about 12 years ago or something like that. What's interesting about it is most games, they have their peak and then they kind of fizzle out. But this game has just been a continuous success from the beginning and just continuous growth. And now it's like, it's top selling game ever. It has 170 million active players and it's still growing. So it's an interesting story. Like, what is it that makes this one game just kind of stand out? Most people think it's a game for children, but actually, the average age is about, 24 or something like that. So it's a game for everyone. So just to provide some context for those of you who don't play Minecraft or don't know so much about the game in detail, we ship kind of themed updates once or twice per year. I don't work at Mojang anymore, but I still say we because you get brain damage when you're too long at one company. It's funny. I still say we about Spotify. I haven't been there for like 8 years. I don't know. But the idea is that each release has some theme, right? So make the oceans more fun, or make villages more fun, or etc. But then it's not a big bang release. Like before we do the big release, we have all these tiny little mini releases that we call snapshots or betas. So typical team does like 2-week sprints, and then every week something goes out to our users. And this isn't like a closed beta or anything. This is to everybody who wants. They can try the latest version, and this is shipped in production every week. I think this is important because not like a lot of companies that get well known don't dare do this anymore. They get too chicken, right? They're like, oh, our brand, we only ship things that are all polished and finished. We can't ship our dinky, buggy little, prototypes, right? But I think it's an important success factor for this game that even now, when it's like such a successful game, we're still allowed and encouraged to ship our dirty laundry, right? Our work-in-progress features and get feedback on it as we're working on it. But it is an important part of the success because that means by the time we get to the actual release, we've already done 20 snapshots and gotten 20 times to, improve the stuff based on the feedback. So user perspective, player perspective, right? You fire up the game, you press play, then you play the latest version, the latest stable version. But if you feel a bit wild and crazy, you can press this over here, and then you'll get the latest snapshot, right? It's buggy, it's a bit unstable. The game usually doesn't crash, but the feature itself might be kind of buggy and incomplete. Some players like that, right? They like trying the latest, greatest. They make, YouTubes about it, and they, stream it maybe. And they feel like they're involved in the design process. In fact, they are because we listen to their feedback. But it's opt-in, right? Anybody can try just by a button click the latest version. But if you prefer the stable version, you can use that as well. All right. As a designer, this is magic. It's so nice to be able to test an idea and just put it out there and let people try it. And I know that it doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to get so many chances to improve the feature based on the feedback and then ship it again and again and again. So by the time we get to the actual release, like I don't feel worried. I know that players like this feature because if they didn't, we would have removed it a long time ago, right? So it's kind of like a way of securing or de-risking a release by shipping often. All right, that was a bit of context. I'm going to talk a little bit about, how a feature is born. And again, this is not so much about Minecraft. A lot of these things are kind of general, like a lot of other companies work in a similar way. And if you work in a completely different context, I'm pretty sure you can take some of these ideas and map it to your context in one way or another. But anyway, typically a feature goes through a number of phases. They're not formally defined phases, but you can typically identify these steps. First step is really, why are we building this feature? Why are we adding, say, goats to Minecraft? We added goats a few years ago. We did it because we added really huge mountains. We wanted something to find in the mountains, a reason to go there. And goats was one of them. So okay, we want goats, but what should a goat do, right? So as a designer, we would do a bit of research there. Go visit a goat, read up on goats, find out what's fun about goats for a game. It's not about making a realistic, perfect goat simulator. It's just about trying to find where's the gameplay value in a goat. Try a bunch of ideas, right? And these are hacks. Like take a pig, skin it to make it look like a goat, make it sound like a goat, put it on a mountain, play the game and see, okay, now what, right? Maybe this goat, maybe it should jump really high. Goats do that. Or maybe it can scream, because goats do that as well. And just kind of hack the system, try lots of ideas in-game, and then play test it together with colleagues. And that way we can try, explore the design space as widely as possible, narrow it down to where is the magic? What would make this, creature a fun addition to the game? I'm just using goats as an example, but it's this way of thinking for any kind of feature. So we narrow it down to the single most promising design, and the rest is thrown away. And this is a really important learning point. These, discarded prototypes, that's not waste. It's the cost of great design. You have to do that. At Lego, they institutionalize this, really clearly, that as a designer, most of the stuff you design is not going to be shipped. You're not going to find them in the store. And that's fine, because those prototypes are what enable us to find the awesome, so to speak. So this is a cultural thing, the acceptance that discarded prototypes are actually value and not waste. So narrow it down, and then of course implement it. And as designers, we also code features. We build them in the product, and then, but not complete. We build the minimal version and then ship it, right? The good old minimum viable product, although I prefer the term minimum lovable or minimum testable. Get it out the door, get feedback, and then iterate gradually based on that feedback. And code quality, and this is a bit at odds with maybe some parts of the Agile community, but code quality kind of comes later. We don't do that from the beginning, because that would just slow us down. Most of the prototypes get thrown away. So any kind of, well-designed code with good test coverage would really just be waste. We want to quickly iterate and get feedback on the whole design idea first. And then once the design stabilizes, then code quality becomes more and more important. Silly metaphor time. So think of it as finding the awesome in a feature is like finding the highest point in a mountain range, right? I want to find the best hill. If I just take the first idea I have and start climbing and iterating on that first idea, I'll end up on the top of this hill, right? Iteratively getting a little bit higher and higher and higher with diminishing returns, and I'll miss out on that peak over there. So I need to send out scouts and explore a bunch of different slopes before I commit to one and start climbing it, if that makes sense. So finding the awesome. What is an awesome feature then? Well, it needs to be fun, of course. This is a game, right? It needs to be technically feasible, right? We need to weigh the cost of the feature with how fun it is. And it should ideally achieve the design goal. So it's not just a bunch of random junk being added to the game. It should meet the goal of that feature. And this is hard. It takes a while to find the sweet spot here. And that's what I think of as exploring the design space. And this involves also a technical perspective. It's not like a designer is sitting there, in the clouds, making up all these wild ideas that may end up being really hard to implement. It's a very close collaboration. And as a designer, you're looking at both tech and gameplay. So gameplay is just what we mean. It's a term for the player perspective, right? So gameplay perspective is what the players are doing in the game. Tech perspective is the code. So we're looking at where is the fun, and we're trying to think about the fun independently of the tech. Like, if we could have any tech, what would we want to make this feature awesome, right? And then adapt the tech to what we want. That's one perspective. But the other perspective is adapt the what we want to the tech we have. So maybe I have 3 promising candidates for this feature. This one is the absolute best, but this one is almost as good, but half the effort. So that would be a better decision to implement it that way, right? Because there's some mechanics in the code we can already use. So being a bit pragmatic and making sure we're always both doing gameplay prototypes and tech spikes to find the best way to make an awesome feature with the least amount of effort. So yeah, classic 2x2 here, right? Value versus cost. And of course, this is the good side of the line, that's the bad side of the line, and there's a big pile of meh here in the middle, right? We want to avoid both the bad parts and the meh part and kind of find this. And we don't know if a feature is here until we've prototyped it. We can spend any number of hours in a meeting room arguing. We don't know. The prototype will give us the strongest indication. So I think of it kind of like, let's say I want to add, like rideable dragons in the game, right? And I have a hypothesis for how that might be, this fun and this hard to build. So form a hypothesis, and then make a prototype. And maybe I learn through the prototype that, oh my God, this is really hard to do because of performance or something. So then I change the design based on that. Maybe I say that you can ride the dragon, but you can't control it. It'll still be a fun feature, but a lot easier to do. So that's hypothesis, make a prototype, etc. Until I get to a point where, you know what, I'm on the good side of this graph. I'm on the top. Let's snapshot this, get it to our players, right? They give feedback, and then I get new ideas to improve it further, and gradually trying to navigate this design space and get as much up and to the left as I possibly can. So features typically go through this rather non-linear, chaotic, journey. And some features, take the same journey but end up in the trash can because it turns out that, the more we work with this, the more meh it becomes. Maybe we should just dump it and, spend that time on something else. So again, avoid sunk cost fallacy, right? I spent a bunch of time on this idea, but that's okay. That doesn't mean we should keep spending time on it. So there's a big graveyard of darlings out there somewhere. Kill your darlings. In the beginning, there's a lot of uncertainty when making a new feature. And we want to drive down that uncertainty. So uncertainty about what makes the feature fun, but also uncertainty about what's the smartest way to implement it. Can it even be done? So in the beginning, code quality doesn't matter. As already mentioned, we focus very much on just iterating and prototyping. But as we get to a point where we understand a little more what what makes this feature great, snapshot it, and as I already mentioned, we gradually shift focus then. So there's some uncertainty still. We are going to learn stuff from our players. We are going to make adjustments, but it's not complete uncertainty like in the beginning, right? So as time passes, we focus more and more on kind of making this really clean code with tests and performant and configurable, etc. This is a hard balance, right? Because if we do the quality focus too late, we might get stressed and end up with technical debt and disappointed players. But if we do it too early, then we get really slow design, and we won't get a good feature because we don't have time to test as many ideas. So this is a tricky balance to find, and that's also one of the jobs of the designers to kind of facilitate this process to find the balance. All right. So what the heck is a designer? Like, is it its own thing? Is it a separate person, or is it this? As a developer, am I also a designer? There aren't any exact answers here, but I'll offer some reflections. In the case of Mojang, what you do as a design owner, every feature has what we call a design owner, which is a person who kind of acts as a mini producer or a mini product owner for that feature from concept to production. And the kind of things you do are similar to what like a project manager or product owner would do. It's like manage scope, talk to stakeholders, talk to the community. But then there's also the craft itself, right? Make the prototypes, write the code, debug, right? And there's some element of research also, trying to find out what would make this fun. So it's a lot of work, right? And someone's got to do it. So I've seen some companies fall into this trap where they think of this work as a separate thing. So there's a separate building with designers, and then they do all the thinking, then they hand off this big document with details, so the code monkeys just implement it, right? That model, I haven't seen that work very well. It doesn't seem to lead to very good products or very happy people. What about the opposite then? What if we say that there is no separate thing called design? As a developer, you are a designer, which you kind of are, and you just do both, right? This, I find, can work in a small context, a single team or a small product. This is great, but it doesn't really scale, right? When you have multiple teams, some more complicated product, then what ends up happening is, and a lot of companies I find end up here, you get people who don't have time to do either job well. So you get technical quality problems because nobody has time to really pay attention to code quality. And you get design depth and just not optimal design because nobody really takes the time to figure out how do we make this feature awesome. So you kind of do a half-assed job of both, is my observation. So I kind of like this view that development as a high-level concept includes a number of things, and one of those things is design. So coding is a craft, designing is a craft. Maybe, security could be a craft. There's a bunch of crafts, and depending on what you're working on, you'll need more or less of them. And they overlap. So as a designer, I'm spending a lot of time doing these kind of things, but I'm also writing code. As a developer, I'm spending a lot of time writing code, but I'm also involved in the design. So there's this big, nice overlap over here. So different people focusing on different aspects of the work, but collaborating closely and overlapping a little bit. Documentation is helpful here. Really useful. Once we have that prototype that kind of illustrates this is what we want the feature to be, making a one-pager summarizing at a high level, this is the way we plan the feature to work, with some GIFs and maybe some things like that. Super useful, as long as the document isn't treated as gospel, right? It's a high-level, short document, and it changes. Anyone can change it as the feature evolves. But just as a useful way of capturing the current state of things. T-shaped people, right? Old classic thing in Agile, and I think this fits right in. Like T-shaped people, you have one thing you're kind of good at, that's the vertical, and the wide part is there's a bunch of things you could do as well, but you're maybe not as good at those things. Agile teams are built of T-shaped people. Most people are T-shaped by nature. So it's pretty natural for us humans to work this way. And I just think of the design as just one of the, this is just one of the T's, right? I'm a designer, but I can test, I can code, I can help with other things. I might not be awesome at some things, but I can contribute. The same thing with everyone else. So as part of this, it's important to note that these teams, these cross-functional Scrum teams or whatever, don't become silos. It happens all too easily. We saw this in the early days at Spotify, right? When we were too autonomous and each team had their own design concept, right? But it's one product. So it started looking like some kind of Frankenstein because each part looked different and worked differently. So we learned that designers, we want every team to have designer, but they need to also work across. And the same applies to all crafts, right? If I'm a database engineer working in Team A, and there's another database person over here, we need to talk to each other, right? Synchronize our design and our choices, our tools. This picture I drew back in the Spotify days, people use different terms. At Mojang, we call it a craft. At Spotify, we called it guilds and chapters. Some companies call them communities of interest. Whatever it is you call it, it's just a useful scaling concept, having these teams and then these kind of virtual, craft-based communication channels. All right, time check here. How are we doing? We're doing fine. So I'm going to get concrete. I'm going to show exactly how it looks like, it feels like when working like this, and then kind of pull out some insights from that. This is a feature I worked on a few years ago. We wanted to spice up a dimension called the Nether in Minecraft. We decided to add two creatures. Piglin, over here, this guy, and Hoglins, they're four-footed friends over here. And the purpose, again, we're pretty careful about being clear about what is the purpose of adding something to the game. Otherwise, we'll just add too much junk, right? So the goal was give life to the Nether dimension, make it feel like, there's life there, there's an ecosystem. And then we wrote stories. Sitting right here are some examples, like what were the kinds of things that players might be telling each other after having visited the Nether. So maybe one player is like, I'm going to make me a nice little home here, and a Hoglin pen for food and breeding. Like, okay, so Hoglin maybe could be a food source. Or, look, mobs, rampage, kill them all, XP, loot. That's another play style, right? People, there's different types of players. We want to cater to them all, etc. Or maybe I need a ton of quartz for my machine, and I heard that piglins, I can barter with them. Maybe I can get a hold. We might not implement all of these, but these were kind of ideas. And one of them was about the ecosystem. That was a bit tricky. Like, how do we make it feel like an ecosystem without spending, months to make a really fancy system for that? So design goal, make it feel like an ecosystem. Hunting was a hypothesis. What if we make piglins hunt hoglins? Maybe it'll feel like they are a part of an ecosystem. But how do we do that? How do we make it balanced? How do we make it so that piglins don't exterminate all hoglins, or that there's perpetual war going on? How do we make it interesting and slightly unpredictable? We mostly prototype in code, but this was an example where it was faster to prototype outside code. So basically defined and iterated on a bunch of behavioral rules for hunts, and then just made some sticky notes representing the different creatures here. So piglins, hoglins, and then role-played this. So we sat there and played it like a board game. Like, okay, if these are the rules, what is this piglin going to do now? He's going to run away, right? That was a fast way to try different rule sets. And finally, we settled on the notion of outnumbering. We noticed that that seems to be the key here. If piglins flee when they're outnumbered by hoglins and vice versa, then that creates a bit of back and forth and unpredictability. So then we put that into the code to try it, and it was really cool. So they're hunting here, chasing this guy, and they're his buddies. And it's like, oh wait, we're outnumbered. Get the hell out of here. And oh, Bob got killed. Wait, never mind. Screw it. Let's stop this now. This is fine. And then they're just hanging around again. So it just creates a little bit of like excitement without perpetual war. It looks really simple and obvious after the fact, but it took quite a while to figure that this is what does it. And the little sticky notes were helpful. So what then do we do with the prototype code, right? So we have a prototype. It proves the point. This feature is fun. Now we want to build it for real. Should we throw away the prototype, start over from scratch with fresh code, or should we build on the prototype, iterate from it? So how many of you would say we should throw away the prototype, start over? Hand up. Got a very small number of hands up there, all right? How many of you would say we should build on the prototype and iterate from there? That was a bit more hands, right? And how many people hate raising your hand? This guy's good. Great. So this is a matter of opinion, and those of you who know me know what I'm going to say. I'm going to pull the "it depends" card, right? Because it really does. The thing is, I sometimes bump into people that are very opinionated and say you should always throw away the code and start over. We should always iterate. But be careful of the always approach, right? It depends. Is the code, how messy is it, right? How much knowledge is built into that prototype code? If it's too messy, dump it. But if it's very valuable and has lots of knowledge in it, maybe we can clean up the mess, iterate from it. So case by case, right? Both options are fine. So yeah, discarded prototypes. Here's an example. We had a hypothesis. This was never on a backlog, right? We don't generally have detailed backlogs for a feature. We just have a design goal and some ideas. This was something that I think it was even my daughter who had this like, hey, maybe the ears could mean something. So we prototyped it, and then it's like, okay, what if you could see emotions from the ears? It was a really easy thing to prototype, and it was kind of cool, but kind of meh. It was like, this is cool, but it's not important enough to test it and put it out on multiple platforms and really do it properly. So we discarded it, even though it was kind of cool. So this happens all the time. But sometimes we notice features that we had not anticipated that turn out to be really cool. We wanted to show that piglins and hoglins don't hate each other. They're not enemies. So we decided that, what if baby piglins ride baby hoglins? That would be kind of cute, right? But then by accident, this happened. Just because of the way the code works. Like, oh, wait a sec. Not planned, but really cute. So we decided that this feature we got almost for free. So this was a keeper, even though it wasn't even planned. We wouldn't have noticed this without prototyping, right? Without tinkering. This would have missed us. Of course, we had to set some limits to it. Like, if you just let him keep going, then it gets a bit weird. And then I was curious, what's going to happen? Like, what if we just keep going? So I just sat back and watched. And, what will the code do? Oh, shit, they all die. Okay, maybe not. So we kind of like... sometimes we prototype stuff without a particular goal in mind, just following curiosity. Like, since I was fiddling with animation and I was a little bit newbie at it, I wanted to know what's possible to do, really. So I was just tinkering around and ended up with this very silly thing. Celebration dance for Hoglins. Like, can we make them dance? It's just 3 things. Hips moving, arms going up and down, head. You can do this at the party. Do it at the party tomorrow. Hoglin dance. Watch and learn, right? This is the only video I made that seems to almost outcompete the product ownership video in popularity. People are really pissed off at me that we didn't put this into the game. We didn't. It was too over the top. What we did put in was this slightly toned down version. When piglins win a hunt, they will 10% of the time do a little bit of a celebration like that. But yeah, sometimes we just try stuff out just to see what's possible. Test continuously. This was an example of what is it like being in the nether when these people are attacking you? Is it fun or is it just a pain, right? We don't know. We have to try. So a lot of time is just spent interacting with their own features. Of course, at the end of the day, I'm just one potential user. So we need to put stuff out to our actual users and see what they think. But a good starting point is, do I see any promise at all? Like, if I hate it, I never want to go to the nether because of these guys, then obviously I probably shouldn't snapshot it, right? Sorry about jumping around here. Where was I? Yeah, tools. As a designer, we spend some time making tools as well, or asking others for help. But tools are so important. This is an example of an overlay just to show what is inside this guy's brain right now. Why is he doing what he's doing? It was a pretty easy thing to add, and it just makes iterating so much faster, or pathfinding, things like that. So we often add little tools here and there just to make design faster. And debugging and testing as well, useful for this. There's other ways of prototyping. Concept art is a form of prototype. We have concept artists. We can ask them for help. Like, we recently added mangrove swamps in Minecraft. And what might a mangrove tree look like? Please give me some inspiration, right? And our concept artists would kind of draw pictures. So yeah, the prototypes come in all shapes and sizes. Prototyping can also reveal nasty technical problems, which can then be turned into fantastic technical opportunities. This was when we changed the way caves generate recently, and made it so that caves can be much bigger and much more dramatic and realistic and cool. But as part of that, it turned out that there's this existing mechanic in Minecraft where oceans are filled with water. So all empty spaces below a certain height level get filled with water. That's why you have oceans. It turned out that that mechanic applied to these caves as well. So guess what? All caves under sea level are flooded. Not good, right? So this was a problem. I'm glad we discovered this early through prototyping, or we'd be in big trouble. And at this point, we might have just said, screw it, we can't make caves this way. But instead, we looked at it and said, can we turn this into something positive? So I tried it turned out to be really easy to change the sea level, just that number, find that number in the code, reduce it. And that gave us ocean, it's like, what's it called? Cave lakes and cave oceans. So underwater bodies of water. It was really easy to prototype just by lowering the sea level. And I was blown away. My colleagues were blown away. We were like, my God, this is so cool. It adds a whole new dimension to traveling in underground. Wow. So let's figure out how to solve this. We had to solve it because we can't have the whole underground flooded, but it also became a way to make it even better than anticipated. So we ended up with this technology which we call aquifers, based on real life, although our implementation is completely unrealistic. And it's awesome. It took a lot of work. It was technically really complicated, but it solved the problem of flooding everywhere and added the concept of underground lakes and stuff. So discovering that early through prototyping gave us the time needed to turn this into an actual feature. And again, small things you can find sometimes, like, wait a sec, if we have underground lakes, what if we just change it from water to lava? That's a trivial change. And then suddenly we get this. Whoa, this is really cool. Also unanticipated, right? It adds an element of danger, of excitement, of beauty, and also utility. Sometimes you need a bunch of lava for stuff, and you can go find a lava aquifer. So yeah, early prototyping, early tech spikes uncovers both problems and opportunities. And sometimes the problems can be turned into opportunities. So the overriding pattern here is using the product itself as the prototyping tool. And this can be done also outside of game development. So in the case of Minecraft, yeah, just tinkering with the game itself. Lego is the same thing. Lego designers, they're always tinkering. They're building stuff in Lego. They're surrounded with Lego, and they're always tinkering around. So this is a useful kind of pattern. It's not always realistic in all contexts, but if it's possible to do, then I can really recommend it. So here's a part where I'm going to do a little bit of Scrum bashing. Let's do some Scrum bashing here. I kind of like Scrum. I've written 2 books about it. I'm a Scrum trainer. But any tool can be misused, right? So there's this thing, the Scrum Guide, which is the official description of Scrum. And if you read that, it talks quite a lot about potentially shippable software every sprint, right? It needs to be thoroughly verified. Let's see, what else do we have? Each increment must be usable, must meet the definition of done, must meet the quality measures. If it does not meet the definition of done, it cannot be released or even presented at the sprint review. There's a reason why this is there. It makes sense to try to aim for having potentially shippable software every sprint, generally speaking, but not in the early phases of discovering a feature. If we followed this by the book, Minecraft would be a much worse product, because we would be forced to take our first idea and make it shippable almost immediately, instead of allowing ourselves to try all these crazy prototypes and shipping crap quality code to our players in a snapshot and getting feedback and then improving quality. So this can really be a design killer if you take it too literally. I'll give an example. This is dripstone caves, which we added. Dripstone is just the general term for stalagmites and stalactites. And how can we make dripstone a fun experience? Why would people want to go there? So we brainstormed what we call sub-features, right? It hurts to fall on a stalagmite, could make it exciting. Or they could fall on you. They drip water, they can fill a cauldron. All these ideas which we explored. This is almost like a mini project, right? Within this one feature. These are sub-features. And prototyping is all about learning fast, right? We want to find out quickly which of these sub-features are the most promising and how can they work together to make the experience of dripstone caves a fun experience. So the dependencies are important here, right? You want to check how they affect each other. So when implementing a sub-feature, just a prototype can be done pretty quickly. The initial implementation of the feature, incomplete, not stabilized, very simple implementation, can often be done fairly quickly. But the vast majority of the work is this bit, right? All the rest, performance, code cleanup, weird edge cases, bug fixes, configurability, etc. That's where most of the work is. And there's not a lot of learning there, right? The design is stabilized by that time. So if you look at each sub-feature, think of it as this is like a map of the work to be done. Traditional kind of Scrum by the book approach, or even Kanban, or any kind of Agile lean approach done by the book would recommend doing that. Vertical slices. If you build one thing, build it all the way to the end, ship it. Thin vertical slices. It's the default kind of Agile pattern. This would really not work, though, in our case. This would really lead to a bad feature, because by the time we start prototyping sub-feature C, we've already finished A and B. They're all stabilized, and we spent a lot of time cleaning up the code, and we don't get to let feature C affect the design of A and B, right? So a much better approach, especially in our case, is really just to prototype a bunch of things, see how they interact together, then make an initial implementation of a couple of them, ship that to our players, get feedback while working on the rest. And then maybe we go here. And then finally, when this starts getting stable in terms of design, we kind of know how it's supposed to work. Then we get into more of this part while still going over there. So it's not. We don't want to do vertical slices entirely. We also don't want to do just horizontal, because that gets a bit too close to waterfall, right? Diagonals, right? It's a messy picture, but it's how I find reality works when you build a really good product, kind of looking both broadly and going deep. This is also why the designer role is important. A person to pay attention on this aspect, like what does it make sense to do right now? Should we prototype the next feature or go deeper on the current feature? Always a balance. I mentioned test automation a few times. One of the first things I worked on when I came into the team was a test automation framework, which looks like this. You build structures in Minecraft, and then they run automatically. So you can, in this case, these are the dripstone tests, right? They run automatically, but they run in the game, and they check that all the mechanics work. It's super awesome, but don't do it too early, right? Because why test something if it's going to change radically later anyway? That would make the test irrelevant. So tests are useful when you make small incremental changes to a feature to check that it still works. That's great. So we have hundreds of these tests now. This is what it looks like when you run the test suite. It runs automatically, of course, in headless mode whenever you make a PR, for example. These things test that the feature works as expected. They don't test that the feature is fun or that it's any good or that it solves the design goal. It's really important to keep in mind, right? So tests are great. They test that things work as intended. They don't test that your feature is good. For that, you need feedback. So I like to talk a lot about this notion of like whoever is making the thing should be in direct contact with whoever is using the thing, if possible. Just reduce the number of things in between, like intermediaries, handoffs, reduce the time between. So if I, as maker, can speak directly to a user while I'm making the thing, that tends to lead to the best products. It's a nice picture, right? I think it's beautiful. I could sell this maybe as a work of art, I don't know. The thing is, reality isn't always as easy as in a picture, right? Like, okay, yeah, but how? How do I do it? Like, we have 170 million active players. How do I interact with 170 million active players? Well, you don't. You pick a suitable subset. So I'll give some examples. This is highly contextual. The way you interact with your users is likely to be different, but I'm just giving examples. So typically, there's different ways, right? There's data we could measure using A/B testing and things like that, how people use our product. That gives us feedback indirectly. We can make decisions based on gut feel to some extent. This is not about feedback, but it's more about how we make decisions, right? The gut feel of an experienced designer or domain expert. And then, of course, there's user feedback and actual interaction. I find that most companies do one or two of these things, but few do all three. So I recommend looking at that. How do we make decisions? What are the factors that influence our decisions? And probably one of these three is a bit of a blind spot, and then maybe get better at doing it that way. We do a lot of this. And for example, our bug tracker is open. Anyone can add a ticket there. So that becomes a conversation tool, essentially. If I made some new feature in a snapshot, someone can submit a bug. Each bug is, in a sense, a design decision as well. You know, this player thinks it's a bug, but maybe that's the way we want it to work. Or maybe his bug ticket gives me an idea. So there's often conversations in the bug ticket to talk about how this might work instead. It's just a useful tool to get people and developers talking directly to each other on specific topics that both are super passionate about. It has a side effect too. It's fun. It's energizing as a developer to feel that, oh, there's people out there. They care about what I do. And as players, it's energizing for them to feel that, oh my God, I can influence this game that I love to play. And I can show off to my friends that, hey, I submitted a bug ticket and look at that, now it's fixed, thanks to me. It's a win-win. Other examples, of course, social media, we ship snapshots. It's great. We can just watch what our players doing with those snapshots, right? Watching streams and videos and comments. And sometimes participating. So I use Twitter quite actively and just put out like, you know, hey, so what do you think about the new terrain here? Or how hard should it be to find a big ground mountain range? And how do you think it feels now, right? Just having discussions. It's a tiny subset of our players, but it's real players and there's interesting conversations. It's kind of like using our player base as co-designers, right? Obviously, as a designer, it's not designed by committee. I have to make a decision together with my colleagues, but the player input can guide that decision. Mini surveys, just little things like how do you feel about the new ore distribution? Is it too hard or too easy to find diamonds? Or the cave entrances, are they about the right size? Just to kind of take the temperature. How does it feel? Sometimes we get obvious answers. Sometimes we get non-obvious answers. Just got to be careful. Watch out for bias. There's people who post stuff on the internet, and there's people who play Minecraft. Never mind the size of the circles; they're not supposed to be proportional. But there is an overlap, right? People who do both, and there's a tiny overlap of people who are allowed on the internet and play Minecraft and talk about it, right? That's this little circle right here, and they get a bit too much influence sometimes. So we have to remember to listen to these people. And how do we reach them? I mean, they're not trying to talk to us. They're just playing the game. Go to where they are, right? In our case, it's quite nice. It's a game. There are servers out there. So I sometimes join servers and talk to players, either anonymously or as a developer, and just chat. And I often got very interesting insights from them as players, just from playing the game with them, rather than watching streamers. So yeah, mixed sources of feedback is useful. You can also get feedback before releasing. And this is where company culture comes in as well. It's really nice to have a culture where you're allowed to talk about stuff. Not always. There are some features we like to keep under the table until they're more committed. But once the people in the world know that we're working on some feature, we are generally encouraged to talk to players about it. So that's great. So I mentioned piglins. You can barter with them. What should you get when you give a piglin gold? I was blocked in my head. I could not figure out what should you get. I don't want to give them too crappy things, but also don't want to give them overpowered items. What's the balance? Put out a tweet, 856 responses. Someone put up a video about the tweet. That video had 200,000 views and 718 comments. It just went crazy. Everyone wanted to talk about what should piglins give you when you barter with them. I could only read a tiny subset of this. I got some other people to help me parse it. But it was super useful. It was like a gold mine of ideas for what they should give and why. Plus, again, it's a fun way to engage the community. So those were some examples of ways that we work with feedback. Of course, it's going to be different maybe in your context, but there are lots of ways. So definitely try hard to get feedback on the stuff you're working on. This is a bit of a trope too. It's even in the Agile Manifesto somewhere that simplicity, the art of what was it, maximizing the amount of work not completed or something like that, not done. Forget. I keep relearning this principle. Simple is usually better, but often harder. So finding the simple design that totally nails it can take a lot of work. The first design proposal you come up with is probably something overly complicated and not as good. So I like this curve, this kind of like diminishing returns curve. So as I add stuff to my feature, there's diminishing returns, right? The first bits are the most valuable, and then as I add stuff, the incremental improved gameplay value is little. So yeah, Stockholm Syndrome. Heard of that? A condition in which hostages develop a psychological bond with their captors during captivity. The feature is a captor. The designer is the hostage. You fall in love with the thing you're working on. Your whole world. When I worked on piglins, that was my whole world. There was so much stuff I tried to add. Luckily, my colleagues stopped me, right? I was like, but this is important. Like, no, it's not. There's other stuff that we could work on instead. And I'm like, actually, maybe, yeah. You just get stuck. So it's really important to involve other people and realize that your feature is not the whole thing. Right? Talk to others. Test your feature in the context of the whole game and get feedback. Yeah, it's the last thing, I promise, just this one last thing. Right? Cut the tail. Oh, sorry, I lied. I have another profound quote by some famous dude, but this is the last one, I promise. But I really like this one. Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. That one is really powerful. I really kind of want that on the wall. Just always thinking, okay, the feature is really good now. Can I remove anything and still have it be as good? All right, can I remove something else? It's super powerful. And again, that's a good reason not to add too much code quality and tests early, right? If I'm going to be removing things anyway. By the way, did you know that half of all quotes are attributed to the wrong person? Says Christopher Columbus. One of the first features I worked on was villager children. I picked a node off the board, which seemed quite simple. We had, villagers have these, there's small villagers, which we call villager babies, although they're more like children. They did nothing, they just stood there, kind of boring. So as kind of a, getting used to the code base exercise, I took on the task of, can we make this a little more interesting? But it was not a major feature of the update, it was just a tiny little thing. So I needed to keep it really simple. And like most designers, I tend to fall into this trap of adding too much scope. This one I'm very proud of. I managed to keep it simple. What we ended up with was just 3 rules, essentially. And we wanted children to play with each other. That was kind of the goal, right? So we got them to jump on beds. That was easy. But how do we create the illusion of children living like children, playing with each other in a village without creating a super fancy system? We ended up with very simple rules. A, am I being chased? If so, run, right? 2, is someone else being chased? These are in order, by the way. So if I'm not being chased, okay. Is someone else being chased? If so, yes, join the chase. Is nobody being chased? How boring. I'll start chasing somebody, right? That's pretty much the full logic of this feature. Later on, we had to add a limit, max kids involved in a chase, otherwise the whole village runs together. So this was enough. And this is a good example of what I think of as most games, they talk about AI. There is no AI in most games. It's FI, fake intelligence. It is simple rules that are mindlessly executed by dumb logic, but it creates the illusion of intelligence, and that's enough. So this creates the feeling of, oh, look at these cute kids, they're playing, right? And that's often more than enough. So in this case, I found these fairly quickly, but sometimes it takes a long time to find the simplicity. And that's, again, where prototyping comes into play, right? Try lots of ideas and acknowledge that your first idea is probably going to be shit, so keep experimenting, right? Another example of a feature, ruined portals. This was also one of my early features where I made some mistakes. The idea was that as we beefed up the nether dimension, we wanted to help people discover that there is another dimension. To get to the nether, you need to build a portal. And most people don't know, or there's no way to discover that you can build portals in the game. You basically have to look on the internet or go to the wiki, which is a bit sad, right? Players who just play the game are never going to stumble over the nether. So we wanted to create a hint. So we had the idea of creating ruined portals that hint about some past lore, and that players seeing that would be like, whoa, that looks like a portal. What if I complete it? Or what if I build something like it? That was a design goal. This was where we ended up. But in my first prototype of that portal, and it is partially hand-built and then partially procedurally integrated with the environment, and they look a bit different as they meld into different parts of the environment. The first version I made of this portal was super fancy. It had all this embellishment, all these little things, right? Because I felt like, oh, I'm going to add something to Minecraft. I got to make it really cool, right? I want to feel proud of this. So I made this really fancy building. I'm not a very good builder, so it took me some time to make this pretty thing. Showed it to my colleagues, and they're like, hey, Henrik, that's very pretty. I'm like, but it shouldn't be so pretty, because we want to encourage our players to build cool stuff. And if you build something really pretty already served, then they're not going to be as likely to make it better. They might even be intimidated to build their own thing because there's this really cool construction here. So that was a big aha that, dumb it down, make it simple. These aren't very fancy. It's just a simple little thing. And then players often take that and they get inspired and they complete it. So these are player-made builds where they find a portal, they're like, oh, I'm going to make this nicer. And then they add lots of details. So that's an important thing as a designer in general in all kinds of products. It's not about you and your ability to make pretty things, right? Sometimes a pretty UI on a web interface is the wrong solution. You want something uglier but simpler that actually solves the problem. So kind of try to drop the pride aspect of things. All right. I'm going to make an attempt at wrapping things up. And to my surprise, we might even have time for some questions. I was worried that there's not a chance in hell there will be time for questions. Okay, there's a lot of stuff in this talk. It is a From the Trenches talk. It is basically me sharing real-life experiences and some of my insights. So your insights may be different or may vary. But if I'm going to highlight some things from this rather, overfilled talk, I would say think of design as its own craft, but tightly integrated with development. So design is its own thing. It's useful to have people with that as their main job. But again, not sitting in some other room somewhere, tightly integrated with the team and allowing for overlap of work. Continuously involve users and developers, super important as well. Otherwise, you as designer will sit there and just come up with a bunch of crap. Or if you are not a designer, but you're working with designers, make sure to get yourself involved, right? If you're a coder, take time away from your coding and go ask that designer, hey, how's it going? What are you working on? What are you learning? Do you need any help? Maybe I should check the feasibility of some of the ideas you're working on. Otherwise, they might present some beautiful finished solution that is unrealistically hard to build. Right? So get involved, create that involvement. Same thing with user involvement. As a designer, you make something, you have ideas for how it's going to be used, why it might be a good feature, put it in the hands of the users, half of your hypotheses just blow up. They use it differently than you expected. So make sure that user involvement happens early, even though it involves the rather painful process of giving people your dirty laundry, right? Showing people a thing that's not finished and yet asking them to try it and give you feedback. It hurts, but it's really important. Code quality is super important, but when you're building something new, innovative, then don't put it in too early because it'll just slow you down. But also don't forget to put it in later. So the opposite, the common anti-pattern in Agile is putting in quality really late when it's too late. And then you have lots of technical debt. So this is really a balancing act. For example, tests is a good example. It's kind of hard to add a lot of test automation afterwards, way later. You want to put it in as early as possible because then you can use the test to support you when you're coding. But again, if you put in the tests and the high quality code before the design is even stabilized at all, then it generally is a waste of time. Effective prototyping helps you discover both opportunities and risks early, right? So it's not only about the customer value, it's also about tech. You're prototyping what can be done in this technology. And one example there is we had this thing when we were developing the new caves. Then there are some challenges, things we need to figure out. How do we make thin caves that are very interconnected? Technically, that was kind of challenging to do in a procedural way. I got kind of stuck. So instead of just sitting there trying to bang my head against this, I organized a cave jam and invited everybody, all the developers, to join in the cave jam. And I just put up, here's the design goal, here's the prototype so far, here's some things that I find really difficult to solve, and I need your help. Go for it. And then that's it. It was a day of just jamming, and people did coding and prototyping, and awesome ideas came out just by involving everyone at that particular moment. Discarded prototypes are not waste. They're crucial for great design. I've talked about that already. And in general, when doing something, especially in a space with a lot of innovation and kind of uncertainty and openness, then we really need to optimize for speed of learning. If we don't know what the best solution is for our customer, we need to try lots of ideas, and then it needs to be cheap and fast. So that takes some infrastructure sometimes, right? Adding tools to make it fast, but it tends to pay off. So yeah, that was it. Some thoughts about design in an Agile context.